All right, today we are diving into one of the biggest, most mind-bending ideas in all of theology, the Christian doctrine of the Trinity. You know, the belief that seems to just completely break the rules of math. I mean, look at that. At first glance, you think, that's got to be a typo, right? It seems impossible. But this little math problem, it actually perfectly sets up the huge puzzle we're going to explore, the Christian understanding of God. How in the world can God be three and one at the exact same time?
Well, the answer, according to literally centuries of theology, is wrapped up in this single statement. It's a claim that doesn't throw out the one, but instead it redefines it by fitting the three right inside of it. This is the absolute core of it all, the idea that God is a tripersonal being.
Okay, so let's get a working definition on the table here. The Trinity. Now there's a really important word you got to know. Consubstantial. It basically means of the same substance or essence. That right there is the key that unlocks the whole thing. The idea is that you have three totally distinct persons, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, who at their very core, in their very nature, are one and the same God. So to really start unpacking this whole divine puzzle, we have to start where the Bible itself starts. Before we can even begin to understand the three, we have to get a solid grip on the foundational belief in the one.
This verse, known as the Shema, is the absolute bedrock of monotheism for both Judaism and Christianity. Theologians will tell you that its main point back then was about exclusivity. See, Israel was surrounded by cultures that worshipped tons of different gods. This was a radical statement. The Lord and the Lord alone is our God. So that's our unshakable starting point. God is one.
And yeah, that leads us right to the big question, doesn't it? If the number one rule is God is one, then where did the number three even enter the picture? Well, as it turns out, early thinkers believed the answer was hiding in plain sight, woven all through the scriptures.
They believed the answer was already there, right in the Old Testament. You just had to know where to look. So let's check out some of these subtle but really powerful whispers of something more than one person in the Godhead.
This is one of the first places people point to, and it's a big one. We're talking about the very beginning, the creation story in Genesis. When it comes time to create humanity, God speaks in the plural. Let us make man in our image.
So you have to ask, who's the us? Who is God talking to? Now some have said, well, maybe he's talking to the angels in his heavenly court. But there's a big problem with that. The text says humanity is made in God's image, not in the image of angels. So for many Christian theologians, this is it. The very first clue, the first whisper of the Trinity in the Bible.
Okay, so it's not just about the language. We also have these moments of, well, divine appearances. The technical term for this is a theophany. It's any time the invisible God shows up in a visible, tangible way. Think of the famous burning bush that spoke to Moses. That's a perfect example.
But the early Christians got even more specific. They identified a special type of appearance they called a Christophany. This is the idea that the Son, the second person of the Trinity, actually showed up in the Old Testament, long before he was born as Jesus in Bethlehem. And the clearest example of this is a mysterious figure called the Angel of the Lord.
Now this guy is not just any old angel. He's treated as if he is God. I mean, he accepts worship from Joshua, something a regular angel would never ever do. And God himself says about him, "My name is in him," which in ancient Hebrew thinking means he carries God's own essence and authority. Because he's also called Israel's Redeemer, many theologians are convinced this has to be an appearance of Christ before his incarnation. So the Old Testament gives us these shadows, these whispers. But then you turn the page to the New Testament, and what was just hinted at before, well, it starts to look a lot more like a blueprint for a three-in-one God. And this verse, right here, the very first line of John's Gospel, it is an absolute cornerstone for this entire doctrine. It's meant to remind you of the first line of Genesis, in the beginning, but it introduces this new character, the Word, who John makes clear is Jesus Christ. And what John does here is just brilliant. Look at the two parts. He says, the Word was with God. Okay, so that implies they're distinct. There's a relationship between two persons. But then, in the very same breath, he says, and the Word was God, which affirms they share the exact same divine nature. He's holding both distinction and unity together in one perfect, paradoxical sentence. We get another massive piece of the puzzle directly from Jesus himself. It's in a passage called the Great Commission. He's giving his final instructions to his followers and tells them to baptize new believers in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Now here's the little detail that is so easy to miss, but it's huge. He says baptize them in the name, singular, not the names, plural. For theologians, this is incredibly important. It suggests that these three distinct persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, all share one single, unified, divine being and authority.
So, once all this biblical evidence was on the table, the job changed. It wasn't just about interpreting verses anymore. It was about explaining the whole thing. How could you possibly build a logical model to make sense of this?
And you can bet that this question has kept some of the world's greatest thinkers busy for, about 2,000 years. The goal was always to create a framework that honored everything the Bible said without just completely falling apart into a logical contradiction.
And over all that time, two main families of ideas have really emerged. You've got your one-self theories. They start with the absolute oneness of God and then try to explain the three persons as different eternal modes of that one self. And then you have the three-self theories. They do the opposite. They start with the three distinct persons and then try to explain how they are so perfectly unified that they are one God.
Now here's the catch. Each of these approaches has a massive pothole it has to avoid. For the one-self folks, the big danger is something called modalism. That's the idea that the Father, Son, and Spirit are just temporary masks or hats that God wears, not distinct persons. That's a big no-no. For the three-self side, they have to avoid tritheism, which is just a fancy word for believing in three separate gods. And that, of course, would blow up the whole God is one foundation we started with.
And all of this brings us to our final thought. After all the biblical deep dives, all the philosophical heavy lifting, where does it all land? Well, for many, the conclusion is that the Trinity isn't actually a problem that we're supposed to solve, but instead, it's a profound mystery we're meant to embrace.
This way of thinking is often called Mysterianism. And it doesn't mean the idea is illogical or nonsense. It just suggests that we're talking about a reality so far beyond our own that our finite human brains simply don't have the capacity to fully compute it. The goal isn't to get rid of the paradox, it's to accept it as a feature of a God who is infinitely bigger than we are.
And so that's the question I'll leave you with. Is the Trinity a kind of divine math problem that we're all supposed to figure out? Or is it a revealed truth about who God is? A truth that invites us to worship and to wonder, precisely because it pushes our minds to the absolute limit. Something to think about.